And the less common thought is he didn't exist at all. So those are the two main thoughts. I mean, everybody has to tackle this issue that you don't find him in the history books. So they tackle it by either saying he was not well known in his own time, he became better known later, or he didn't exist at all. But what I started finding when I was comparing the New Testament and Josephus was that, hey, there's a bunch of stuff here that is common, but the time is wrong. The time is wrong. So take the issue of robbers, okay? So Jesus is crucified with two robbers, right? And there's a lot of talk of robbers in the New Testament. Barabbas was a robber. The word robbers appears many times. When you look at Josephus, you find that he talks about the robbers a lot. And the robbers are rebels. The rebels against Rome. They called them robbers because, hey, they did a lot of stuff, those rebels. So they were called robbers in Greek, lestai. But the funny thing is that when Josephus describes the robbers, they are there from the time the Romans occupy the Jewish realm until the year 6 AD, when there is an uprising by a guy named Judas the Galilean. Then he does not mention the robbers one single time until the late 40s, when they reappear, and then, they swarm the realm, and then starts the Jewish war in the year 66, and the Jewish realm is destroyed by the Romans in the year 70. They hold out in some places a little longer. But in those years, between 6 and 44, or really 48, you do not see the word robbers one single time. And when did Jesus exist, according to the New Testament? Well, he supposedly was born in the year 1, or depending on which source you look at, a few years before then or a few years after that. But basically that's it. And he was crucified under the time of Pilate, okay? And Caiaphas, the high priest Caiaphas. And we know when that is because that's how chronology is described in ancient times by the names of dignitaries. So Pilate was the Roman prefect, the leader of Judea, until the year 36. So he must have been crucified no later than 36, but there were no robbers then, right? According to Josephus. So, but the thing is, this kept happening when I was comparing them. It happened with a lot of things. There were no crucifixions at that time. There was no animosity between Samaritans and Jews at that time. It came later. And in this chronological, and usually it was 15 to 20 years later that all these things happened. And that's but I kept ignoring it like everybody else. You know, when you read something, this is the issue of science overall, and this applies to scientists overall. This is a common, we all have preconceived notions. We all have our ideas. When things don't fit, we discard them. That's how the human mind functions. We discard them. So I discarded it until one late night. And I'm going to stop there because I'm sure you have some more questions before we get to the person I think was Jesus.
Well, yeah, that's wonderful. You gave us a lot. So let me unpack some of this. So,
okay.
First of all, because I noticed that you really give a lot of credibility, and not just you, mainstream researchers give a lot of credibility to Josephus and his accounts. How are you? How did you determine? Okay, this timeline with Josephus is more reliable than the actual timeline that is in the Bible. I know you touched on some of it, but could you just get more detailed about that? Why Josephus? Why is his timeline the timeline that you say, okay, this is the way I think it should be? It should be later on in like the 50s. You said, right? The 50s, like the 40s or.
Well, when we get to the point, yeah, when we get to the issue of who was Jesus, if you look at Josephus's texts, we haven't talked about that yet. But as a rule, Josephus, there are for sure problems with Josephus. When they have done archaeology based on his texts, they find that he exaggerates numbers, he exaggerates sizes. You know, he says about the Jews being, you know, I don't know how many, and then you see, no, they couldn't have been that many, and maybe you think, but he is generally reliable. If he says this is where they built the palaces of Herod, then you dig, and there is the palace of Herod, okay? I mean, so he is overall reliable. With exaggerations, you have to remember he was a fighter in the war against Rome, and he became a turncoat, and he joined the Romans. Okay, so he has a lot of justification issues, for sure. But as a historical source, he's generally reliable. But moreover, he's the only thing we have. Is the only thing we have. I mean, you can look at Tacitus, and you can look at Suetonius, and you can look at some of the Roman sources. I mean, you know, it's nothing compared to Josephus. Josephus wrote 4 major works, out of which 2 are really relevant to this. One is the Jewish War, which is not 1 book, but 7. The other one is Jewish Antiquities, which is 20 books. I mean, it's massive amounts of texts. So you can I jump in and ask you? Yeah, I don't mean to interrupt you. No, when you speak about his writings, Jewish Antiquities, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, does he not speak about Jesus specifically in that writing, or no? Okay, so now good. So now we're approaching the one thing that people hang their hat on, and it's generally called Testimonium Flavianum. Okay, it's a paragraph in Jewish Antiquities that suddenly speaks of Jesus as, you know, almost in reverential terms. Mm-hmm. I would say no scholars consider this as the original text. I mean, there may be single scholars, but those who want to be kind, they say it's been changed. Those who are more dismissive say it's been added later. And there are many reasons for this. One is this reverential tone. I mean, Josephus hated the rebels, and he hated the messianic leaders, okay? And this is suddenly he describes him as a god, you know? But the other things is that it's placement. It's in the middle of 2 paragraphs that are obviously joined together, and suddenly they're split by this paragraph. And there are other arguments. For instance, you don't find Jesus in the earlier Christian church fathers' texts. There is no reference to this paragraph. But when you look at later Church Fathers text, there are references to this paragraph. So this implies that it was not there from the beginning, but it was added probably maybe in the 4th century AD. So you may find, you'll find some scholars to say, listen, it was there, but it's been changed. You find very few scholars who are going to say this is an original Josephus text. The same goes for John the Baptist, but because there's a paragraph also about John the Baptist, and there more people are inclined to look upon it as authentic, but there's disagreement also there.
Oh, thank you. Speaking of early church fathers, you made me think of another question I wanted to ask you. Give us the accounts of Polycarp and Irenaeus, like the ones who say, okay, we have a connection with John the Baptist, and not John the Baptist, John the Revelator, and then we know John the Revelator was associated with Jesus. How do you speak to us on that? How do you resolve that in your research?
No, and here we're getting closer now to my hypothesis, because Irenaeus really says he seems to be alive much later than I don't have the quote exactly here, but it is one of the things that's really noteworthy, that he, that when they talk to John, it seems like Jesus is alive later than he would be alive according to the New Testament. You have to find the quote to quote it exactly, but it's certainly one of those strange quotes. And I think because I am a believer that Jesus really did exist, so I think we should get to the point. We really have to get to that point of where.
No, go ahead.
Okay,
it's all you. I don't want to interrupt. I jumped in with this, and you said
no. That's good. No, it's good because
go ahead.
I really do believe Josephus writes about Jesus. Okay, I really do believe he does, but he doesn't call him Jesus. Okay, so what happened?
Should we get the drum roll?
Yeah.
No, I'm just kidding.
Okay.
What does he call him? What does he call him, Lena?
The Egyptian.
Should we call him peaceful more times? Let's continue with adding in the excerpts into this beautiful conversation so we can see exactly how on point Amadou Rakapatar, aka Alpha Uno, was back in 1967 and 68. Excuse me. Who was Jesus by race and religion? The religion of Jesus was Egyptian pantheism, and he was a hybrid by race, meaning he was mixed. The African pygmies existed before the Great Flood, and their spiritual science was Nuwapu, pronounced Nuwapu. Therefore, Nuwapu, the spiritual science of all woolly-haired people after the flood. Nuwapu gradually waned, and pantheism gradually waxed. After the moon cycle began with Adam and Eve, pantheism waned, and religion as we know it today waxed. Jesus was the last legal heir to the Egyptian throne, St. Matthew 2, chapter 15, verse. He was the son of a Roman military man of high rank and a black Phoenician queen of Egypt who was unmarried. St. John, chapter 8, 14 verse. Bible Interpretation, Book 1, letter Q, 1967 AD. Excuse me. So let's read Matthew 2:15. And there was unto the death of Herod, that it might be fulfilled, which was spoken out of the Lord by the prophet, saying, out of Egypt have I called my son. All right, so we're going to now go to St. John chapter 8, 14 verse. Jesus answered and said unto them, though I bear record of myself, yet my record is true, for I know whence I came and whither I go, but ye cannot tell whence I come and whither I go. End quote. Listen to some of my reason. From reading this quote, one would not understand how this refers to a female or queen, Cleopatra for that matter. In order for Zane Tar Kinu Unu Nupu to get his answer, we did 9 Ennead Passages 9 orbs told him to read back further in this chapter to make the connection. Jesus went unto the Mount of Olives, and early in the morning he came again into the temple, and all the people came unto him. And he sat down and taught them. And the scribes and Pharisees brought unto him a woman taken in adultery. And when they had set her in the midst, they said unto him, Master, this woman was taken in adultery in the very act. Now Moses in the law commanded us that such should be stoned, but what sayest thou? This they said, tempting him that they might have to accuse him. But Jesus stooped down with his finger, wrote on the ground, as though he heard them not. So when they continued asking him, he lifted up himself and said unto them, He that is without sin among you, let him first cast his stone at her. And again he stooped down and wrote on the ground. And they which read it, being convicted by their own conscience, went out one by one, beginning at the eldest even unto the last, and Jesus was left alone, and the woman standing in the midst. When Jesus had lifted up himself and saw none but the woman, he said unto her, Woman, where are those thine accusers? Hath no man condemned thee? She said, No man, Lord. And Jesus said unto her, Neither do I condemn thee. Go and sin no more. Then Jesus spake again and unto them, saying, I am the light of the world. He that followeth me shall not walk in darkness, but shall have the light of life. The Pharisees therefore said unto him, Thou bearest record of thyself, thy record is not true. Jesus answered and said unto them, Though I bear record of myself, yet my record is true, for I know whence I came and whither I go. But ye cannot tell whence I came and whither I go. Ye judge after the flesh, I judge no man. John chapter 8, 1 through 15 in part. As we see, the prostitute whom many believe was Mary Magdalene was actually Cleopatra. Why? Because Flavius Piso, Flavius Joseph, original name Joseph ben Matthias, born AD 38 AD, Jerusalem, died AD 100 in Rome, Jewish priest, scholar, and historian who wrote valuable works on the Jewish revolt of 66 to 70 AD and on earlier Jewish antiquities of the Jews and against Apion. And the likes wrote the true history in this form in order to deceive. Secondly, Cleopatra indeed had many lovers, for lack of a respectable term. The last queen of Egypt, Cleopatra, husband and lovers. Like we see in films and read in novels, I grew up with the idea that Queen Cleopatra used her amazing beauty and sex appeal to control powerful men like Julius Caesar, Mark Antony, Ptolemy XIII, and many more. After years of studying Egyptian history, I discovered that Cleopatra's beauty was not her essential weapon. Ancient Egyptian coins show her with a masculine face and a hooked nose. But Cleopatra was highly educated and diplomat. She studied at the museum and spoke many languages. Even she was a naval commander and led thousands of Egyptians' navy in actual battle. Cleopatra's husband, Ptolemy XIII. Ptolemy XIII was Cleopatra's first husband and her brother as well. This is a practice that had been followed by many ancient Egyptian kings throughout the history of pharaohs. Divine royal blood never leaves the royal families. Cleopatra did not love Ptolemy XIII, but for political interest she married him. Her husband died of drowning while he was trying to escape the field of battle. Cleopatra had not any children by Ptolemy XIII. Julius Caesar. Julius Caesar was the most powerful man at the time. He was about 52 at the time. Cleopatra was 21 years old. For Julius Caesar, Egypt was very important to Rome for its grain supply, so Caesar united with Cleopatra for his own interests. He was already married, but he had sexual relationship with Cleopatra. After 9 months, they had their love child, Caesarion. This is not true, but we're going to get into this later. Julius Caesar went back to Rome with Cleopatra as his mistress and his child. After his assassination, Cleopatra was forced to flee Rome back to Egypt. Mark Antony, after the assassination of Julius Caesar, after the Civil War broke out between the Roman generals Antony and Octavian against those who had organized Caesar's assassination, Cleopatra found herself alone and weak against her enemies. After Mark Antony controlled the eastern half of the Roman Empire, he summoned Cleopatra to see her Right away, he began his legendary love affair with the last queen of Egypt. This is the one she had the son Caesar by. We're going to get into that later. Mark Antony protected Cleopatra's crown and maintained Egypt's independence. Maybe he was the only one Cleopatra loved. They had 3 children. Alexander Helios, Cleopatra, Selene II, Ptolemy Philadelphus. After the defeating battle of Actium, Cleopatra and Mark Antony took their own lives in 30 BC. Thirdly, Mary, the mother of Jesus, was also coded or hidden as Cleopatra. How? An ancient name for Egypt or Kemet was called Timeri. The tar was dropped and Mary became Mary. The E and the O are interchangeable, so they once again conceal the truth with their lie. What's in their name? Let's look at the word Mary. The etymological origin is the Egyptian letters M and R. There are many names that we can come up with by using these 2 letters and placing vowels before the letters, after the letters, or in between them. This is exactly what was done to translate the Egyptian hieroglyphic word Mir into the English word Mary. As stated before, Mir meant beloved in ancient African language on one level, but on a metaphysical level it had a deeper meaning. In the Kemetic signs, Mir or Mer or Mar meant magnetization or attraction, as in the law of attraction. You will see biblically the name Mary and Martha around Jesus often. They are feminine natives, Isis, Nephthys, Neith, and Serket. To distinguish which one is to recognize their function in nature, you have Mary, the mother of Jesus, Mary Magdalene, who was beloved by Jesus, Mary and Martha, the sisters of Lazarus, who is actually Osar, of the more well-known name Osiris, Mary, mother of James, and Mary Magdalene, who brought spices and oil, Mary of Salome. All right. As stated earlier in this booklet, latter-day rulers of Egypt were Phoenician, and they were called Hebrews before the Jews were. Jesus was next in line to become king of the Hebrews because his mother was queen and he was the oldest child. Jesus' mother ruled Egypt before the year 25 BC, and when her ruling days were over, Jesus was supposed to ascend to the throne of Egypt, but the Jews and Romans were controlling Egypt at that time and would not allow Jesus to take the throne. And of course, Jesus became very wroth or angry at the Jews and Romans. One reason the Jews and Romans did not want Jesus to become king is because he was critical of their control over Egypt and their domination and oppression of the Phoenician. Bible Interpretation, Book 1, number 34, 1967 AD.
Also recognized as the Son of God in Egypt, after his mother named him co-ruling Pharaoh of Egypt. Cleopatra declared Caesarion to be the King of Kings at the age of 13 during the Donations of Alexandria ceremony in 34 BC. The face of history suddenly changed when Caesarion's father, Julius Caesar, was stabbed to death by his most trusted men. Octavian, the adopted son of Julius Caesar, swiftly seized power as the new Roman emperor. After Caesar's death, Cleopatra became romantically involved with a married commander from Caesar's army named Mark Antony. Mark Antony and Cleopatra parented 3 children, a twin boy and girl, followed by a second boy. Since Caesarion was Julius Caesar's son and the rightful heir to the Roman Empire, Cleopatra feared for his safety. When Octavian's mighty Roman army invaded Egypt, Cleopatra arranged for Caesarion's safe passage out of Egypt with her most trusted servants. Historians confirm that Cleopatra sent Caesarion to India. There are no historical records of Caesarion's fate, despite false rumors of his capture. Cleopatra's trusted servants who traveled with Caesarion became the boy's parent guardians. But who exactly were these parent guardians who Cleopatra entrusted her son to? Were their names Mary and Joseph by any chance? While Caesarion fled from Egypt with his parent guardians, Cleopatra and Mark Antony's 3 children were placed in the care of Mark Antony's wife. After suffering a crushing defeat against Octavian's invading Roman army, Mark Antony committed suicide by falling on his own sword. The devastated Cleopatra also committed suicide by a self-inflicted poisonous snake bite. While traveling undercover through Egypt with his parent guardians, Caesarion was forced to hide his identity and change his name. The Egyptian name for Jesus is Isu, which means the son of Isis. It can be found in Egyptian hieroglyphics. Matthew 2, verses 13 and 14 of the Bible tell a parallel story of the young child Jesus and his mother fleeing into Egypt with Joseph under the cover of night.
In the year 1887, a book was published in Russia which rocked the Christian world. It was vilified and condemned. It was called The Unknown Life of Jesus Christ. The writer, Nicholas Notovich, was a respected journalist. Notovich claimed his book was a factual report of a trip he made to the Himalayan mountains in remote northern India. Notovich may well have been the first outsider to make his way to Hemis, an isolated Buddhist monastery hidden high in the Asian mountaintops. Gaining the confidence of an elderly monk, he was shown ancient scrolls which tell the story of a scholar and prophet named Issa. In these secret records, Issa is described as a foreigner from a small Mediterranean country. The stranger arrived in India as a teenage boy to study the teachings of the Buddha. And according to the scrolls, he lived here 500 years after the prophet Buddha died, a time that coincides exactly with the lost years of Jesus. Nicholas Notovich was convinced that Issa was Jesus of Nazareth, and that he carried back to his homeland the principles of Buddhism. Half a century after Notovich was in Hemis in 1902, a Hindu priest sought refuge in the same remote Indian monastery. He too translated the scrolls and published a work. His translation verifies the work of Notovich.
Ancient writings do exist from both Persia as well as India that Jesus did indeed travel to India, but we do not have 100% proof that he was there. The proof, however, does lie in his teachings when compared to sacred Buddhist writings.
The authenticated ancient scrolls found at the Hemis monastery near Leh in Kashmir document the life of Saint Isa, leaving home at the age of 13, joining a merchant caravan, traveling the Silk Route, and arriving in India at the age of 14. The Egyptian word for Jesus is Isu. The Greek word is Iesus, and the Arabic word for Jesus is Isa. Isa continued his travels through India and Tibet and the holy cities, where Brahmin priests taught him to read and understand the Vedas. He learned Pali and studied the sacred sutras and how to cure by aid of prayer. He began teaching, performing miracles, and explaining the holy scriptures in monasteries and market bazaars. As an adult, Isa finally left India and Tibet and traveled to Alexandria, Egypt. Why Alexandria? Because that's where Isa, whose previous name was Caesarion, grew up. That's where he last saw his mother, Cleopatra, alive. Isa spent 3 years in Egypt before searching for his younger half-sister and 2 younger half-brothers fathered by Mark Antony. They had inherited land in Syria. Despite false rumors of their early deaths, historians confirm that Caesarion and his 2 half-brothers mysteriously vanished from the historical record. Did they really vanish, or did they just reappear in the biblical record? According to the Bible, 2 of Jesus' 12 disciples were named James and Thomas. The Bible identifies James and Thomas as full brothers. Jesus, on the other hand, is identified as their half-brother. Thomas is not only identified as Jesus' younger half-brother, he is also called Jesus' twin. But how could Thomas possibly be Jesus' younger half-brother and his twin at the same time? The historical records show that Cleopatra had 3 children fathered by Mark Antony. 2 of them were a twin boy and girl. Isa Caesarion clearly had a younger half-brother who was also a twin. At the scene of the crucifixion, there were 2 Marys present. One was Mary of Bithynia. When Roman Emperor Octavian invaded Egypt, Cleopatra sent her 13-year-old son Caesarion to India with Mary of Bithynia and Mary's wealthy uncle-husband named Joseph of Arimathea. Since Caesarion was the true heir to the Roman Empire, Emperor Octavian wanted him killed. Mary and Joseph became Caesarion's adoptive parents and later his loyal disciples. The second Mary present at the crucifixion was Jesus' younger half-sister, Mary Magdalene, whose birth name was Selene. She is also identified in the Bible as Mary of Cleopas, meaning Mary of Cleopatra. Selene was the orphan daughter of Cleopatra and Mark Antony, who both committed suicide. After being captured by Emperor Octavian, Selene was raised in Octavian's royal household with her 2 brothers and with Octavian's son, Tiberius, who became the next Roman emperor. They were raised together by the emperor's sister, Octavia. Selene eventually married and became the Queen of Mauritania. Like her mother Cleopatra, Selene wore the headdress of the goddess Isis.